You were told you could make it. Work hard, get a degree, buy a house, save for retirement. That was the deal. That was the American middle-class promise. And for about 30 years, it worked. Then, quietly, slowly, without a single announcement, the deal was broken, and the middle class started disappearing. Not collapsing overnight, not in one dramatic crash, just shrinking year by year, decade by decade. In 1971, 61% of Americans lived in middle-class households. Today, that number is 50%, and it's still falling. This is not a political video. This is not left or right. This is math. This is data. This is the cold, mechanical reality of what happened to the most powerful economic class in human history. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why it happened, who it happened to, what drove it, and what it means for you personally going forward. Let's go. First, let's define what we're actually talking about, because middle class is one of those terms everyone uses and almost nobody defines precisely. Here's the Pew Research Center definition, the most widely used benchmark in America. A middle-class household earns between 2/3 and double the national median income. In 2025, that translates to roughly $56,000 to $169,000 per year for a household of three. That's a wide range, and that's intentional because the middle class was always meant to be a wide tent. A teacher, a plumber, a mid-level manager, a small business owner, a nurse, all middle class. Different incomes, same basic economic reality. Stable housing, reliable transportation, health coverage, kids in decent schools, some savings, a retirement that actually exists. That was the middle-class life. Now here's the question that should keep you up at night. When we say the middle class is shrinking, where are people going? Some are moving up into the upper income bracket, but far more are moving down into the lower income tier. From 1971 to today, the lower income share of American adults grew from 25% to 29%. The upper income share grew from 14% to 21%. The middle hollowed out from both sides, but the downward pressure was significantly stronger. The ladder isn't broken. The rungs in the middle are just disappearing. Now let's talk about the first force killing the middle class, wage stagnation. This is the story nobody tells correctly, so let me give it to you straight. From 1948 to 1973, worker productivity and wages in America rose together almost perfectly in lockstep. You produced more, you got paid more. Simple. Then, in 1973, something broke. Productivity kept rising, wages stopped. From 1979 to 2020, worker productivity in America grew by 61.8%. Wages for the typical worker grew by 17.5%. Let that ratio land. The economy got dramatically more efficient. Workers got dramatically better at their jobs. The output per hour worked increased by nearly 2/3, and the worker kept 17 cents of every dollar of new value they created. Where did the rest go? To the top. Between 1979 and 2020, the top 1% of earners grew by 179%, the top 0.1% by 389%. This is not a coincidence. This is not an accident of the market. This is the result of specific policy decisions, the decline of union membership, changes in tax structures, trade agreements that shifted manufacturing overseas, and the systematic reduction of worker bargaining power over 4 decades. The middle class didn't spend its way into poverty. It was outrun by a system that stopped sharing the gains. The second force, the cost squeeze. Here's a framework I want you to hold in your head. The middle class life has 2 categories of expenses. Category 1, things that got cheaper. Television, clothing, electronics, food at home, toys. Category 2, things that got dramatically more expensive. Housing, healthcare, education, childcare, higher education. Notice what's in Category 2. Every single item is something you cannot opt out of if you want a stable middle-class life. You can choose to not buy a new TV. You cannot choose to not have health insurance if you have children. You can choose to wear last year's clothing. You cannot choose to skip your kids' education. The things that got cheaper are optional. The things that got more expensive are mandatory. And the mandatory costs have exploded. Since 1980, college tuition has increased by over 1,200% adjusted for inflation. Healthcare costs have risen by over 600%. Housing costs in major metro areas have increased by 300 to 500%. Meanwhile, median household income adjusted for inflation has grown by roughly 15% over the same period. The math doesn't work. It never worked. The middle class wasn't failing to keep up. The finish line was being moved. The third force, the great hollowing of middle-class jobs. This one is structural, and it's accelerating. Economists call it labor market polarization. Here's what it means in plain English. The American labor market used to look like a bell curve. Lots of jobs at the bottom, low skill, low wage. Lots of jobs in the middle, moderate skill, moderate wage. These were the middle-class jobs: manufacturing, administrative, clerical, mid-level management. Some jobs at the top, high skill, high wage. Today, that bell curve looks completely different. The middle is collapsing. High-wage jobs, software engineers, financial analysts, doctors, lawyers, are growing. Low-wage jobs, food service, retail, personal care, are growing. Middle-wage jobs, the jobs that built the middle class, are disappearing. Why? Automation, offshoring, technology. The jobs that were most vulnerable to automation were exactly the routine, predictable, mid-skill jobs that defined middle-class employment for 50 years. The assembly line worker, the data entry clerk, the bank teller, the travel agent, the middle manager whose job was processing information. All gone or going. And here's what makes this different from every other previous wave of technological disruption. Previous disruptions created new middle-class jobs to replace the ones they destroyed. The Industrial Revolution killed farm jobs. It created factory jobs. Computers killed typist jobs. They created programmer and analyst jobs. This wave, AI, robotics, automation, is different because it's not just replacing manual labor, it's replacing cognitive labor. The very skills that defined the middle class, processing information, following procedures, managing routine complexity, are exactly what AI does best. The new jobs being created are either highly specialized, requiring years of education most middle-class workers don't have, or they're low-wage service jobs that don't pay a middle-class wage. The latter is still there. The middle rungs are being removed one by one. Now let's talk about the fourth force making recovery almost impossible: the wealth gap. Here is a number that fundamentally changes how you understand American inequality. The top 10% of Americans own 93% of all stocks. 93%. Why does this matter? Because for the last 40 years, the primary driver of wealth creation in America has not been wages. It's been asset appreciation. Stocks, real estate, business ownership. If you owned assets, you got dramatically wealthier over the last 4 decades. The S&P 500 has returned roughly 10% annually on average since 1980. Real estate in major markets has tripled and quadrupled in value. Business valuations have exploded. But the middle class, by definition, doesn't own significant assets. They own their house, maybe, if they bought before prices went insane. They have a 401k, if their employer offered one, if they could afford to contribute. They don't own stocks beyond that. So when the market went up, and it went up enormously, the middle class watched from the outside. The wealthy got wealthier through asset appreciation. The middle class got poorer in relative terms because their wages stagnated while the wealth of asset owners compounded. This is why the wealth gap in America is so much more extreme than the income gap. Income inequality is bad. Wealth inequality is catastrophic. The top 10% of Americans hold more wealth than the entire middle class combined. And every year that passes, with assets appreciating and wages stagnating, that gap widens automatically, without anyone doing anything wrong. Just math. Compounding in one direction for the people who have assets, compounding in the other direction for the people who don't. The fifth force, the retirement crisis hiding in plain sight. Let me paint you a picture of what's coming. In 1980, 38% of private sector workers had a defined benefit pension.
A pension, meaning you work for 30 years, you retire, and you receive a guaranteed monthly payment for the rest of your life, regardless of markets, regardless of what you saved. Today, less than 15% of private sector workers have a pension. Instead, we shifted to defined contribution plans, 401ks, IRAs, which sounds fine until you look at the actual numbers. The median retirement savings for Americans aged 55 to 64, the people within a decade of retirement, is approximately $134,000. $134,000. At a standard 4% withdrawal rate, that generates about $5,360 per year. Per year. The average American spends roughly $48,000 per year in retirement. That gap between $5,360 and $48,000 is filled by Social Security, which the Social Security Administration itself projects will face funding shortfalls.